After 30 years of research, Dr. Dale Bredesen says we now know why we get Alzheimer's, and therefore how we can reverse it and even prevent it. He's proven this in trials on people with mild to moderate declines in their memory and ability to think. As he explains in his new book, The End of Alzheimer's, the key is understanding that Alzheimer's can have up to 36 different causes. Just like a roof with 36 holes in it can only work well if all 36 are repaired, all 36 potential causes of Alzheimer's must be addressed for a person's brain to function properly. The causes, he says, include genetics, exposure to metals, toxins, a poor diet, and more. Dr. Bredesen says each of us can see where we are when it comes to all 36 Alzheimer's risk factors by taking a test called a cognoscopy. The results from that test are plugged into a computer algorithm to determine your own individualized treatment based on your own strengths and weaknesses. Dr. Bredesen recommends everyone get a cognoscopy beginning at age 45 to prevent Alzheimer's from taking hold. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thanks, Lori. The book is called The End of Alzheimer's, and Dr. Dale Bredesen is here with us now. And Doctor, this is a breakthrough. You researched, according to your book, is there any literature anywhere that says we have a cure for Alzheimer's?
No, and we can't call this a cure yet because you really need to look at an autopsy to say, the entire process is gone. We can't say that yet. What we can say is for the first time, we can reverse the symptoms. So we can make people better, and we have now over 1,000 people who've been on the protocol. And the key is to look at what's actually driving it. And just as you wouldn't say, well, you can ignore 9 commandments and just follow one. We find the same thing. When you look, this is a complex chronic illness. And if you remember what happened with HIV, it took 3 drugs. One drug doesn't do very well. Alzheimer's is much more complicated than HIV. So we find many different things that have to be addressed.
Nobody has dared to come out with a so-called protocol to end it. You're the first one. Am I right in that?
That's correct. So in 2014, we published the first peer-reviewed paper that showed, and this was initially just 10 people, and I have to say, when we got the first call from the first person who said she was back at work and things were great, I was really surprised and excited because we've been working on this for so many years. We see it again and again.
Alzheimer? I know we had President Reagan, who was beloved by so many, had this disease, and he wrote that thing, I'm going into the darkness. And what happens when somebody gets Alzheimer's?
This is a great question, Pat. And in the book, we talk about someone who actually descended and came back. And so she wrote about what it actually felt like to be descending into Alzheimer's, and then what it felt like to come back and to be well again and to be healthy again. So this is a disease that has a number of different contributors. As Lori mentioned, we identified initially 36 things, but these all contribute through the same network to the same ultimate change.
Well, people thought, okay, we found amyloid plaques, and yippee, we have an answer. We didn't have an answer with that, did we?
That's exactly right. Here's the surprise, Pat. Amyloid is actually a protective response, which hadn't been appreciated before, to 3 fundamentally different insults that happen to your brain: chronic inflammation, a reduction of trophic support. Those are nutrients and hormones and factors and proteins in your brain that support your neurons. And then exposure to toxins. If you're exposed to certain toxins, as Lori had mentioned, from mycotoxins from molds or things like mercury, your brain actually makes this amyloid that we pick up as the disease as a protective response to that. So it's a very different look than what we originally thought.
Let's go against those insults. The trophic, for example, what exactly is that?
So your brain needs dozens and dozens of factors. You have a very complicated computer inside your skull, and it needs not only things like vitamin D and vitamin B12, it needs things like estradiol and progesterone and testosterone, nerve growth factor, which is a protein made by your brain. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. There are dozens and dozens of these factors. And what happens is, as you get a little older, you can decrease the production of those so that it changes a fundamental balance. You have a beautiful balance throughout most of your life in your brain structure. And a change in that balance can ultimately lead to this pulling back that we refer to as Alzheimer's disease.
All right, well, now, what is it that would be the cause? What kind of insult would take place in the brain that would tend toward Alzheimer's?
A very good point. There are dozens and dozens of things. So, for example, if you have chronic exposure to pathogens such as Lyme disease. That's one thing. Your body tries to fight the Lyme disease by making the amyloid that you then pick up in the brain as Alzheimer's. If you're exposed, if you have mold in your home, surprisingly, it turns out that the molds actually make specific toxins called mycotoxins, and there are several of these, trichothecenes and ochratoxin and things like this. You make this, again, to bind up that toxin. You're trying to protect yourself from this, but in so doing, you are also downsizing.
So is this mold, if we live in a wet area here down on the ocean, mold will tend towards Alzheimer's if you live?
In some people, that's a great point. So some people are very good at avoiding it and very good at excreting it. So we're all detoxing ourselves from these various things. And most of us successfully do that. But for people who have some genetic backgrounds, and there's something called HLA-DRDQ, it's a genetic marker that can actually tell you whether you have sensitivity. So we recommend people get this evaluation. We call it cognoscopy. Anyone over 45, get an evaluation to see, where do you stand? Do you have, in fact, an environment that's a problem? Do you have insulin resistance, which is one of the very common problems? If you go out and eat a bunch of processed food and a bunch of sugar and things like that, you develop what's called insulin resistance. Your brain no longer responds to the insulin in the way that it should. And that is one of the important contributors to Alzheimer's disease.
It looks like inflammation is one of the chief causes of all of the pathology that we have. Well, you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So inflammation, chronic inflammation, as you know, for heart disease, it's a problem, and it's also a problem for Alzheimer's. And it leads to what we call type 1 Alzheimer's. So there are these different subtypes that we discovered, and one of them is this inflammatory type. And you know, the Ayurvedic physicians, thousands of years ago, knew about this, and they called this pitta. Pitta in dementia. Now, they didn't call it Alzheimer's, of course, but they knew about dementia, and they called that type pitta, which is hot.
There was a story about a group, I believe it was in Colombia, that had a genetic predisposition. How extensive is that?
That's exactly right. It's a very uncommon cause worldwide and very uncommon cause in America. So fewer than 5% of people will have this genetically predetermined Alzheimer's. And that particular one that you mentioned is a gene called presenilin-1 or PS1. And it is a cause of familial, but most, 95% of Alzheimer's is so-called sporadic Alzheimer's. It is associated with risk from a gene called ApoE4. So good idea to check out your ApoE status. And people used to say, I don't want to know because I don't, there's nothing you can do. That's wrong. There is a tremendous amount that people can do.
36 factors, though, in your book. People have got to be alert to these, all 36, though, don't they?
Well, so the thing is, you can now go in, and we've trained now 450 practitioners from 7 different countries and all over the United States, so that you can go, including some practitioners from Virginia, and you can go and you can find specific causes. You can look and see what your status is, and then you can work with a health coach who will help you to get on the optimal program. And we've developed, as Lori said, a computer-based program that tells you what are the most important things for you and what is your optimal program.
Give us a couple of examples of people who have had, they've sunk into the deep night of Alzheimer's and they've come back.
It's absolutely striking, Pat. And I have to say, I thought I was going to spend my whole career with transgenic mice. And so back in 2012, we had our first patient come through. And I talk in the book, for example, about one person, Edward, who was unable to remember the people he had lunch with, for example. Had a quantitative neurocognitive testing that showed that he had sunk down to the 3rd percentile for his age. Mm-hmm. He had a PET scan that showed classic Alzheimer's disease. He also had the risk gene, which is the ApoE4, so he had all of those. And got on the program, and within 6 months improved, and finally he went back for more quantitative testing, and he'd gone from the 3rd percentile to the 84th percentile, so doing much better than average. He was literally closing up shop. He's now opened a new office and has 3 offices.
That's good.
Is now 4 years on the program and doing absolutely splendidly.
Well, the program, primarily you're dealing with inflammation, you're dealing with the mold, you're dealing with toxins, and you're supplying the nutrients that people need to nourish their brain. Is that essentially it?
The bottom line here is that people do not get this disease for no reason. And we keep being told it's mysterious. There's nothing you can do about it. It's not mysterious. There are factors that contribute to this, just as there are to heart disease, no different. And so you look at all these things and you can actually see for each person what is driving the problem. And then what you want to do is attack all those things. And you want to optimize. You change the balance, literally, between the memory side and the forgetting side.
Peer review, are your associates going along with what you found? I mean, this is a huge breakthrough, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. So we've had a lot of positive feedback, and we've had over 5,000 emails about just our first paper. We've published a few more. There are now over 1,000 people on this. There was an article in the London Times today about our work, and of course you can imagine the experts are skeptical. That's okay. As we have more and more people, the skepticism will go away.
If your work is taken out of the equation, there is nothing. Am I correct?
That is correct. There's no alternative right now. The drugs do not help very much at all. And our argument is, if you're going to have a drug, fine, but do it on the background of the entire program.
So you're talking about removing the causes of inflammation, removing the toxins that are in the system that may be affecting people, giving them the tropic material that they need to build up their brains, and that's it. It starts working.
It's getting at the root causes and optimizing these many different factors. That's when we begin to see this turn around. And so here's a challenge for all of us. Let's all work together to reduce the global burden of dementia, because this is a major problem throughout the world.
If somebody gets your book, do they have the clue? I mean, do they have to get one of these tests?
So the book goes through all the different things. It goes through all the different tests, the scientific background for this, and it's written for everyone. So it goes through all the different tests you can get, where you can get them, what they mean, how to interpret them, and then what is the program. And it even has specific programs that have worked for specific people and people who have talked about their own programs.
Well, you're talking about 75 million people at risk of this stuff. I mean, this is huge.
This is now the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. and the #1 cause of death in the U.K. Past heart disease and past cancer.
In the UK,
in the
number
UK,
one?
Dementia is the #1 cause of death in the UK. So this is a big problem.
The tragedy that comes upon a family when their loved one is suddenly out of it and facing death, because most of them die if they've got this, don't they?
Yeah, as they say, everyone knows someone who survived cancer. No one knows someone who survived Alzheimer's. So these are the first.
Whew. Doctor, God bless you. I hope people listen. Ladies and gentlemen, the book is called The End of Alzheimer's. It's available wherever books are sold. Dr. Dale Bredesen, it's monumental research that he's done. Nobody, in my opinion, has come up with any kind of a solution to Alzheimer's. When people have it, and I've had some dear friends that go into that thing, and it is just beyond belief how the tragedy in people's homes. So let's do what we can. Doctor, thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat.
God
Thanks for
bless
having
you.
me on.
All right. Dr. Dale Bredesen, ladies and gentlemen. The book, again, is called The End of Alzheimer's. This is not an easy read, I might add. To say this is a fun book would be why. I've got to say, it is very complex. And this 36th step is complex, but so is Alzheimer's. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat.